Ancient Egypt. I'd like to start here instead of Mesopotamia, where a lot of people like to start, just because the civilization itself is older because of the Nile River. So before the civilization really gets going, I guess the culture, I guess I should say, is older. If you didn't know, the Nile here is that the mountains are back here, and they're going to melt. Some of the snow on the mountains will melt, and it runs down this river into these cataracts or drops in the river. It's one big vein, and we're talking ancient times before this is dammed up. And it goes to a lower elevation and then fans out. And when it does this, usually every year, then you have the floods. So the river is taking debris with it, essentially silt or mud. Right, it's making new soil that in the floods is getting dropped. So Egypt is going to be important. Ancient Egypt is for a long, long time for our purposes, because that new dirt is really, really good for staple annual grains. So remember, farming really important after people settle down. And what's really good is to have, so your spelt or your early wheat, barley, rye, anything else that's growing, it grows, you harvest it every year and then die. So this is different kind of crop than like an olive tree that we're going to talk about when we get to ancient Athens. So there are different background circumstances for all this. The Egyptian governmental representatives, they had this flood down to where they would mark the peaks of it with sticks, and then they would collect the revenue in the form of grain for the farmers that they had allocated the land to and all that. So even if you think back in the day, if you're going to get away from the government and taxes and all that, not true, man. As soon as people start getting together and there's a head person in charge, you're going to have to kick up. This has always been the case everywhere, all over the world. Okay, so goes back 3,000 years, A lot of people say even longer than that. And we're going to get to some of this art, oftentimes predicated off of the god. And so there are a whole bunch of gods in Egypt, but it seems like the oldest one is Re or Ra, or sometimes they smashed them together like Ammon, Ra. Will become a single god later. Remember, Egypt's around so long that you even have different gods. Gods get smashed together, depending upon what period of Egypt you're talking about. Didn't know about the 365-day cycle, but they had a solar calendar, but really what they did was they just kind of started over again their calendar with a new pharaoh every time. It goes through the mythology here if you're interested in the mythology. The pyramids. How do we build the pyramids? People say, well, aliens. Aliens built the pyramids. Well, okay, where did the aliens come from is where you need to follow up with that if somebody ever says that. And I'll tell you that we know that this is not the case, that people built the pyramids. And then the next thing you'll hear, and some of you have probably already seen YouTubes around things like this, they say, well, wait a minute, if Egypt has pyramids, but we also know that in Central America, right, with the Mayans and the Aztecs that had pyramids, must be aliens, right? Must be a common civilizations we're talking or something like that. And I'm going to say, nah, probably not. Probably just that when you want to go higher, in ancient civilization, getting high is important. So literally, not figuratively, of course. And it starts from something like this. The thing that we don't see in the picture are the thing that's older than pyramids, mummies. Right? Mummies are off here, like out in the desert a little bit more. And so what people do all over the world, they'll bury their relatives, but then they'll go pay their ancestors homage. Ancestor worship is older than any religion by far. And so, and I'm being overly simplistic here, but so this is the idea. You go out to pay homage to Uncle Buck, Right, you got your Uncle Buck, so you're going to bring you maybe some wine that's probably diluted with water, as it was in the ancient world, and you got some bread, or maybe with the Egyptians, beer, because all the staple annual grain is quite likely that the pyramids were mostly constructed in wages of beer, believe it or not, because beer kept better because of the alcohol in it, and then the rivers would get contaminated, the water supply would get contaminated, and so they didn't know that the alcohol was killing the germs when they mixed it with water, but that was the idea over time. Though they knew it worked. So if you go pay homage to your Uncle Buck out here, and he's in the desert, Buck has dried up quite a bit. Right? And then you can imagine, since if it's kind of a loose sand and not the compact sand, and the winds change, then Buck is uncovered. Right? Buck is coming back. And even today, we know, like, why do ghosts come back? Some unresolved issue, or this, or something you got to take care of, right? So they started moving. They moved the graves more closer in, and not out farther where the looser sand was. And then it turned into a little bit of a beat the Joneses, like in the neighborhood. So people would have, if I'm a rich, important man and I want my ancestors to worship better than this knucklehead down the road that I've lived around most of my life, I'm going to put up a little shade thing. I'm going to put a couple poles and some reeds over it, and my ancestors are going to worship me in shade. Look at that. Take that. You can't outdo this. But then, of course, they would try to outdo it, and it would get bigger. The next guy would do it to get bigger, and then it'd fall down because of, like, this is not the best substance to build on in the world. They didn't know anything about digging in and rebar and concrete or any of that stuff. And so then finally, at the end of the day, if is height, right? So there was a utilitarian function to shade and being covered and the worshiping and all that. But at the end of the day, if it turns out that just whoever has the largest or the highest funeral thing matters, then the height in and of itself becomes valued. Well, how do you go higher then in the ancient world, and especially on this substrate here that is probably not the best substrate to build on? Same thing as in Mesopotamia and other sections of the world. Well, you got to have the weight collapse in on itself. And if you're going to go higher and you want the weight to collapse, to press inward, you're going to get thinner as you go up. Right? So the ziggurats that we're going to see in Mesopotamia, or here it's just basically more filled in ziggurats, you're going to go up to a kind of a point. And so in Mesopotamia, you have a priest up here. They'd end up having a religious celebration. So the function kind of changed a little bit after the time. But here, this would actually be hammered gold back in the day. Everybody would see it shine. Painted white, the limestone was, and a lot better filled in than it is now. This has actually eroded quite a bit over time. How did they build the pyramids? Nobody knows for sure, really, but probably I think probably had to do something with all the sand, because people tend to use what's there. Sand is there, and so why couldn't you just sort of build a big sand mound and then drop the rocks? And so these are the little rocks on the outside. There are some extremely large rocks. When you get into the interior of these things, they know the quarries that they came out of sort of upstream a little bit. It was remarkable feat of engineering just to get those big rocks there. And they would place them so closely together. Sometimes after they chiseled them out, made sure they fit and all that, you can't even get a nickel in between most of it. It's very tight in the center of some of these things. So I'm not sure exactly, but that's the best theory I've heard. There are others. There could be a new one out I haven't heard of right now. Not a bad presentation topic, by the way, if you want. I'm always interested in stuff like this to see if y'all stumble across anything I haven't heard of before. But the alien stuff, like, that's a bad idea. There's no evidence for any of that sort of stuff. All right, pyramids and ancient and modern. So, like, we like to steal the idea sometimes in a modern context. Grave robbers stole most of, so when the pharaohs died, the pharaohs are usually under these pyramids way back in the day, and then they would sort of have secret chambers in them, and because they knew that sooner or later, like the grave robbers were kind of come there. And inside, if you ever get to the center of one of these, there's all sorts of amulets of protection and this. So not just the physical people to come rob you, the spiritual enemies that are out there, all sorts. But grave robbers took most of them. In fact, most of the pharaohs got moved at one point to a central location because it was so bad. Like even in ancient times, the Egyptians knew they had such a problem that they located a lot, the ones that they knew about anyway, to a central location. Here we have King Tut's funeral, and the reason King Tut is here is because he was such a minor king. We tend to think, oh, this is a big deal, King Tut, major pharaoh. No, he is the boy king. He died pretty quickly at a young age, and they wanted to get him in the ground and forget about his sort of whole lineage here because his father was a mover and a shaker. I think Amenhotep, there it is. Amenhotep IV was his original title with the sort of the history that it comes from, and then he changed it to Akhenaten, or the shining spirit of Aten, the sun god. He said there's just one God. It's just the sun. The sun is the only God. So this has caused scholars ever since we've had scholars to want to look back here and say, well, wait a minute, is this sort of a precursor to Moses? And Moses is one God. And by the way, Moses is an Egyptian name, by the way. Tutmosis or something like that. So we're just getting part of the name. Okay, and so after he moved the capital into the middle of the desert. After he dies, Akhenaten, King Tut takes over. And basically there's a bunch of old men, especially old priests around him, who were really upset that this kid's father sort of cut them out, right? As an outdated head of an outdated religion that he was saying didn't exist in the first place. So now they use his kid to bring back their own power, essentially. Had poems back in the day. Some of these poems, by the way, are really funny, and some of the writing we get locally is about from the construction of these pyramids. Believe it or not, they found records, and it's all the stuff you would see on a daytime soap opera. And so, like, for example, and when I think it was like over this way, they found some ruins from a workers' camp. And the things it was stuff like this. You wouldn't believe it. As soon as her husband goes off to work every day, I mean, my God, she looks out the door, makes sure nobody's there, gives the call, and then this other guy comes right around the corner. I mean, not even 10 minutes after her husband, blah, 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 and on and on and on. And so that's not high art, of course. That's just maybe a little bit step up from graffiti, but it's some just funny stuff that they caught. The Egyptians tended to like, I'll skip over this for a minute. We're going to get to realism and idealism here in a second. But it is worth pointing out that Egyptian women were really important. And we mean aristocratic Egyptian women, because it passed through the female, the land did. And so therefore, through the female's lineage, that's who's going to control the next pharaoh. All right, so much more powerful than in other civilizations we're going to look at. Egyptian art, we get the stick figure stuff here. Walk like an Egyptian. They like, I'm going to call this idealism. So this it looks kind of like he's stuck, right? They like that. They knew how to draw naturally. You can see the birds are sort of taking on, like when they're taking on fright. That's more real, like it is in the actual world. This is not like this doesn't really look so real. People aren't this rigid. So this is on purpose. And so when they found they would start off with a grid, believe it or not, before anything else. For these stick figures like this, as I'm going to call it. But they like this because it suggests permanence. As you read about in the chapter, right? Everything about Egyptian society is about permanence, preparing for the next life, the ideal. And so this, in their mind, would get them closer to that. even though it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us. That's the way they thought about it, because this life is just a bat of an eye, right? Really, you're in preparation for the next life. Okay, realism and stylization, or idealism. Okay, notice that so the face is, it's not exactly like an actual person, but you can kind of see that this is a youngish man, but not a specific man. So I'm going to say that part of it's more ideal. Same thing with her, youngish woman, childbearing, years, all that. But he is kind of stepping, like he's taking an actual step forward. Right, so more a nod to realism there, suggest life and all that. But no actual, I mean, there are no wrinkles here, or the really defined muscle tone and all of that. I think that back in the day, I'm going to suggest that this is as good as it gets, all right, as far as the human form. So they like this. They wanted to represent this. We're going to pick up this idea when we get to Greek art. Some of the really, because the Greeks will copy some of this stuff. So if you think about it, whereas now, I don't know if this is exactly true, but I'm going to say that we idealize linebackers, right? We WWE, even though most of them are probably jacked up on steroids or whatever, something like more muscle is the idea. I'm going to say that's bad in terms of like the way they thought of it, because look at this guy. You know what you can do with a body like this? You can not feed him as much as you need to feed a linebacker. You can march him through the desert. He's not going to overheat on you. He's not going to need as much water. All that sort of. So you're going to get the stamina and all this that you tend to get with smaller people, and you don't tend to tendencies, right? Not every single person. With larger people. And that so that at the end of the day, he can go through this long travel and then go fight the Syrians or whoever was coming through that they needed to fight at the time. Also here, this other than hips being a little bit small, prepared to have babies, right? This is a big chunk of the ancient world, right? But also ideal, right? Or a good form, essentially. Look at where we are. My goodness gracious. So I'm just going to call it 2500 BC. I mean, goodness gracious, this is a long time ago. And so we're going to drift over time to more realism, but we're not quite there yet. This is actually part of a song there would like, this doesn't crack me up as much as I think the first book I taught out of 20 years ago or something like that. Was this guy wrote a poem to his son about basically about getting a job and not going and visiting the houses of prostitution every day, because his kid would come home with a bunch of flowers around his neck because that's what he got at the houses of prostitution. And then, oh my God, if he would just take up being a scribe, if you could get a normal job, then you could start a family, and he's going to become a grandfather and all that sort of stuff. And this also, by the way, around 2500 BC. All right. So I guess some things may never change, right? I think that'll cover it. The skinny. I'm trying to make these screencasts where I don't kill y'all like I did my previous classes, where I'd go on and on and on for like 30, 40 minutes about ancient Egypt. We'll see how it works out, and if when y'all, I'll get y'all to give me feedback later on. And if even just tell me, too much, not enough, because I can always change these for future courses.